Right. Okay. So, as you see, there are three parts. First part on the decline, second part current situation, third part, perhaps a sort of view into looking into the future. So, part one, I'm going to talk about the decline of cricket in schools from 1979. Now, one reason for this, obviously, is this lady here. The second reason, 1979 was my first year. 78, 79 was my first year of teaching. That's the first year I started coaching cricket in schools. But I think I feel the decline of cricket in schools, both in the state sector and in the independent sector, believe it or not, started at this particular point. Now, one of the first things you probably know about is how the Thatcher administration sold off playing fields. I was working in a state school at the time. Something like 75% of our playing field was sold off, including the cricket square. That to me was, it was one of the worst things to happen, and it actually hastened my departure eventually into the independent sector, where I knew that cricket pitches would be safe. So something else during the Thatcher administration was the education reforms, in particular the reforms of Kenneth Baker and his predecessor, Sir Keith Joseph. Now, I remember a time in the mid-80s when there was lots of teachers' action. I was blacklisted by my colleagues because I carried on running cricket teams during that time, when most of them were on industrial action and had withdrawn their goodwill and weren't doing anything out of hours. Now, some of you may recall the introduction of what was called directed time, where teachers were expected to work for 1,265 hours over 195 days. And at that point, a lot of teachers decided that they weren't going to run sports teams out of hours, particularly those non-PE teachers, the ones who had large teaching loads, those who had large marking loads, and were involved in the sort of preparation of exam classes. 1988, the introduction of GCSE meant a change in how children were examined. We had a lot more sort of practical assessments. We had coursework, and with it came a lot more emphasis on the importance of the exams. And at that point, children started to sort of recognise the need that they shouldn't really be playing cricket during the sort of exam period. Then in the sort of national curriculum that came along a year or two later, we had less emphasis on team sport, particularly in the PE national curriculum, where it was more based on individual skills. Then lastly, we had the expansion of the HE sector, where a lot more emphasis was placed on the importance of particularly A levels. Previous to this, sort of people were getting things like unconditional offers or 2E offers. From about the sort of from about 1990 onwards, a lot more importance was placed on this. Then we had Labour Party education reforms and the introduction of AS levels that really did bang a nail into the coffin of school cricket, with children in, as I say, by 2010, children in the UK were the most examined anywhere within the OECD. Fortunately, AS levels were withdrawn by the Cameron government in 2016, but cricket hasn't really had this sort of opportunity to recover since that point. Then we're going to come to the next two slides illustrate about the school calendar. So as you see, the school calendar we now have was based on Victorian working habits. So we had a long summer holiday originally that was brought in the 1870s to help sort of families bring in their family harvests. Obviously, these days do we really need the 6 or 7 week summer holiday? Then we had, with the introduction of the GCSE, a shift forward in the school year. I can recall in the year before GCSEs came in, that the school year ended on the 24th of July, and we restarted on the 12th of September. That longer summer term meant more opportunity for cricket. Now we've got schools who are basically, a lot of independent schools are now finishing on the last Friday in June. That means the school cricket season is ever shorter. When I was at school, half-term holidays only used to be 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. Meaning more opportunity for cricket. And also in recent years, we've seen a shift forward of external exams, both GCSE and A-levels, into the period before half-term, whereas going back to the 1980s, they never took place until after half-term. Another piece of legislation was to do with minibus driving. This affected all sports, because prior to 1997, someone passing their driving test could drive a 16-seater minibus. Now, this meant that you could get your team, you could get all your kits in the back of a minibus. Since 1997, people have only been allowed to drive minibuses holding a maximum of 12 people. And in some cases, more recently, they've tried to bring in legislation sort of banning it, so it's only 9 people. That is no good for the PE teacher who needs to go out and take his cricket team to away games. So that was another thing that has been suggested to me as being a factor in the decline of cricket. Then, of course, you'll all be familiar with this scene, and the fact that the ECB basically sold TV rights to satellite television, behind a paywall in 2005, meaning that the vast majority of children weren't able to watch live cricket, test cricket on television. To me, that was a backward step by the ECB, and I know I've been supported in this view by a good number of people. And lastly, we've had a sort of movement of winter sports into summer. Rugby league is a good one. In my recent school survey, a number of northern schools cited this as a reason for the decline of cricket in their schools. We've had, about 6 or 7 years ago, amateur rugby league moved to become a summer sport to mirror the professional game. The same is also happening in football, where I live in southwest Lancashire. Children's leagues now are now running from February through to the end of November, and having their sort of their break in the months of December and January and part of February. Obviously, because of things like weather, the fact is it's much more pleasant to watch a game of football when the weather is warmer. And I know certainly in schools in this region, they are now playing 3 terms football. Again, all the cost of cricket. And in the town where I live, none of the secondary schools, 3 secondary schools, play cricket in any way, shape, or form. So it's all it's all rather depressing. So if I look at the current situation, and this is based on the surveys I did on behalf of the Schools Cricket Committee, of which I'm the administrator, and doing them on behalf of the MCC and also the Headmasters Conference. We've done surveys looking at the sort of popularity of cricket and looking at the way cricket is played in a lot of schools. So a little bit about the methodology. We contacted around 500 schools on our mailing list. We also used ESCA in 2022 and the county boards in 2025 to circulate it around state schools who were on their lists. As you see that, my most recent survey, 281 schools replied. That, it is probably around about 45% of the total schools who were contacted. So what do we find? Well, if we look at the schools by type, both in this is the most recent survey. You'll see there, vast majority are HMC independent schools, as we expected. Same figures in the 2022 survey, and also the same, roughly the same figure in the 2011 survey that was conducted before I took over as the administrator. As you see there, about a quarter of the schools were state schools, and that actually reflects very much the makeup of particularly the national schools under 18 T20 competition, and so probably reflects quite accurately the amount of schools playing cricket at the sixth form age group. In terms of numbers playing, numbers were down, although I did ask a slightly different question in asking how many children were actively playing cricket rather than those doing it in sort of curriculum PE lessons or playing things like house cricket. So these were actual numbers representing the schools. Sort of comparison, I know between 2011 and 2022, numbers declined amongst boys by about 30%, but rose by many thousands of percent amongst girls. In 2022, we had about 20-odd thousand girls playing through playing cricket, either through things like curriculum PE or representing their school. And if you see the fairly wide sort of base in terms of the number of where schools came from, although very few in the southwest, very few in Wales, and only one Scottish school because they were the only one. They are the only Scottish school who actually take part in English schools competitions. So that's why the anomaly there. So moving on, if we look at HMC schools, this is what I was reporting just now. This is the number of children actually playing cricket of any way, shape, or form in 2022. So, including things like house cricket, curriculum PE cricket, as well as team cricket. But the decline is there, and certainly the initial figures I'm looking at do indicate a sort of further decline in the 2 year. I asked for figures for last year, and as you see that there's probably a decline. I also asked a question about facilities, and I looked particularly at state schools. State schools did a slightly different survey. And sort of looking at their facilities, and you'll see that, obviously a large number, as you would expect, don't have grass pitches, but but also that is quite striking. About 40% of the schools who replied, that was 71 state schools, about 40% don't have any pitch whatsoever, and some have no practice facility like nets. And certainly if the ECB is serious about getting cricket back into state schools, then vast amounts of money need to be spent on cricket facilities. That my initial thoughts is unlikely to happen. Another thing that struck me was we've seen this massive growth of girls' cricket, where cricket has now become in a lot of schools the #1 summer sport. The girls have fallen in love with the game, yet a lot of the girls' independent schools, that seems to be the stronghold of the game. Again, there's an equal lack of facilities. As you see, a lot don't have a pitch. A lot don't have nets, and some are just restricted to using things like an AstroTurf. For all their cricket practices. So all their sort of bowling practices, their fielding practices, and even in some cases their games are being played on AstroTurf. I also looked at the sort of format of cricket being played, and overall, in amongst boys in 2022, 80% of the cricket being played was T20 or shorter format. And this was also sort of reflected in sort of boys' first 11s, the under 18 sides, where you see that over 20% of cricket in those schools is T20 cricket, and some schools are playing nothing but T20 cricket. I haven't really had a chance to sort of number crunch the percentages playing just 2020 cricket from the latest survey, because it only closed at the end of last week. But you'll see that shorter format games seem to be the norm. Declaration games that always used to be the sort of meat and drink of school cricket have largely disappeared. Now often schools will only play 1 or 2 declaration games a year, often against the likes of the MCC. Now, if we look at girls' cricket, again, as you would expect, it's shorter format cricket. The vast majority of it, probably sort of 80% or more, is again T20 cricket, with the rest of it being made up with shorter form cricket, like, for instance, the 100, or even I've heard of schools just playing T10 games. If we look at girls' first 11s, again, this is reflected. The longest most schools seem to play is 30, perhaps 30 over cricket. Although last year I did hear, and I've reported it in the new Wisden, that two schools will be the mixed senior independent schools played a 2-day game last June. That was certainly a first. Wisden have no record of it previously. So perhaps going forward, we should be sort of encouraging girls to play longer format cricket in order to develop their skills further. However, if we're moving on, if we look at the issues that are facing schools, obviously, as you would expect, exams and revision pressures. Parental pressure, stopping their children playing during term time, senior leadership teams in schools, sort of restricting the amount of cricket being played. And then we've got staffing issues. Now, this is both staffing in terms of schools being able to recruit teachers who are sort of cricketers, but also then getting staff who are actually in the schools to commit their times for our after school activity, and also in the case of the independent sector, Saturdays. The traditional boarding schools will play Saturday afternoon fixtures, where a lot of day schools will play Saturday morning fixtures. So these, this, along with the sort of lack of facilities, particularly sort of a lack of pitches, seem to be the sort of major issues now facing schools. Now, just to finish this section, lots has been written in the press about the England cricket team and the sort of makeup of the number of independently educated cricketers in the men's team and also the women's team. So I thought I'd do a bit of investigation. So I've used two examples. One was the last Test match England played, where 8 of the 11 were privately educated. And interestingly, all the batsmen bar Ben Stokes were privately educated. And then I compared it with probably one of the most famous tests of all time, the Laker test of 1956 against the Australians, where Jim Laker took 19 wickets. And there we've got 7 of the team were privately educated. Then we've got another tier there, the grammar schools. Now, the grammar schools largely don't exist nowadays, apart from probably 4 or 5 local authorities around the country that have managed to hold on to them. So we had another 3, as I say, were grammar school educated, and only one, Tony Locke, who was the bowler who took the wicket that Jim Laker didn't take, was educated in a normal state secondary school. So the grammar schools operated very much like a lot of independent day schools now, and in fact, a lot of grammar schools became independent day schools after 1975. So to me, things haven't really changed. This has been a perennial problem, and the way the press presents it is as if it's a contemporary problem. So let's move on. The future. So let me just make sure I'm on time. So a couple of headlines about that appeared about sort of the state of school cricket in recent months. Now, the ECB, as you probably know, brought out the State School Action Plan last October. Richard Thompson, the ECB chair, spoke at a conference I organised last April at Lord's for heads of cricket, and there's about as much said in this report about state school cricket as he said at the meeting, and I'm afraid he didn't really inspire a lot of confidence amongst the 120 odd people who were there. So those are the aims. Okay, just briefly. Okay, yeah, lots of ideas about boosting participation. Providing the necessary barriers, to me, is the major stumbling point, because I think it's going to take tens of millions of pounds to redress the balance and sort of get state schools back playing cricket, so they can whether they'll actually be able to compete with the independent schools on an even keel is, to me, as I say, it is a very difficult proposition. Certainly, a lot of counties have taken on board the third point, and now with the sort of likes of the open trials, talent is being identified from the state sector, and working in conjunction with the HMC are working in conjunction with the MCC hubs and identifying sort of talented state school players that not always are being picked up by the counties. And there has been, I know, in some counties, some animosity between the county boards and the MCC hubs. Anyway, that's another thing to solve. So these, in my recent survey, these were the obstacles for state school cricket. As I say, this will be sort of recorded, and if anyone wants to share it with me, wants me to share this with you, I can do. As I say, I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's going to be a very difficult proposition getting cricket back into state schools. And playing at, say, the level, say, something like football is being played at now. So another issue is VAT on private school fees, and this is again something that could actually impact on independent schools. That their extracurricular offering is tailed down completely. So they just become merely exam factories. That I think would be a very sad thing. Meaning that possibly our first class game will suffer. Obviously that 60% of all first class cricketers have come through the private school system. Anyway, moving on. Some questions I've sort of posed at the end, and these are the sort of questions that I'm going to be looking at through the schools cricket committee, with sort of schools in focus groups over the course of the next 6 months or so. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me. That's my email address if anyone would like to get in contact with me. I'm sort of glad, I'll gladly share sort of data with you, and gladly share some more opinions. So this, as I say, has only been a sort of a snapshot. I'm sure I could talk for much, much longer. Anyway, so over to you, Philippa.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob, for a really interesting presentation. And it was interesting because our recent event conference, I know we had some speakers talking about cricket in schools as well. So definitely some similarities, I think, in terms of what you've presented this evening. So I am conscious of time, so I will open it up for one question to start with. I just stopped the